This video goes through the 7475 review questions that were posted on Edline to give you the answers and to show you how we work each problem to help you get ready for our next quiz. So the first question on the review, which will be similar to the first question on our quiz, says to choose any method and solve the linear system. Hopefully when you looked at number 1, you thought the x's and the y's were all lined up and we'd like to use the addition method. Are we allowed to add them right away? The answer is no, right? We know that if we would add our equations immediately, we would still have 6 x's and a negative 1 y, and neither of our variables would cancel out. So that means you had to figure out a number that you could multiply one of your equations by in order to get opposites. If I were you, I would choose to multiply the second equation by a negative 2, right? That will make our x's opposites and will help them to cancel out. So I'm going to rewrite my first equation so that I can line up my variables, and then I'm going to multiply every term in the second equation by negative 2. So I get negative 4x minus 4y equals negative 26. Once you set that up, right, we can go ahead and solve. So we know that our x's will cancel. We actually have negative 7y equals, and then 12 plus a negative 26 is negative 14. So if we divide both sides by negative 7, we find that y equals 2. Hopefully at this point you knew that you weren't quite finished. We had to go back and substitute so that we can solve for x. So I'm going to plug in y equals 2 into my first equation. That gives me 4x minus 6 equals 12. So I know to solve that I need to add 6 to both sides. That gives me 4x equals 18. And then I can divide by 4, and I'm finished. So unfortunately, this one doesn't work out perfectly for us. 4 goes into 18 4.5 times. Right, so our final answer is 4.5, comma 2. That would be our ordered pair, which is our solution. Okay, the second question, my numbers got messed up again, so it says number 1, asks us to figure out how many solutions the system has and then graph the system on the coordinate plane. So we can first, if we just want to make sure before we graph what our answer is, we can first use the substitution or addition methods to just solve the system. So in this question, I would say to use the substitution method, right, because the second equation has y by itself. That's always a good reason to use substitution. So when we use the substitution method, we take what y is equal to, which is 5 plus 2x, and we substitute it in for y in the other equation. So if I rewrite my first equation, I get 6x minus 3. Now I want to put in my 5 plus 2x in for my y equals 12. So we know to solve this, we first need to use the distributive property. So I'm going to distribute a negative 3 to both terms. So that's a minus 15. And a minus 6x equals 12. Hopefully the next thing you're thinking is that we need to combine terms, right? We have a 6x minus 6x on the left-hand side. We know that those should just cancel. That's going to give us 0 x's. So we get negative 15 equals 12. Does negative 15 equal 12? Does that make sense? No. So we know that when we get an answer that doesn't make sense, we have no solution. If you solve first, then you can say to yourself, okay, I know that we don't have a solution. What type of graph has no solution? Right? So we know a solution is where our lines intersect. So if we don't have a solution, they must not touch, which must mean that we have parallel lines. So we know to graph our equations, we first need to solve for y. Our second equation's already solved for y. So I'm going to go ahead and graph that one. We start at the 5 on the y-axis, and then we go up 2 and over 1 for our slope. So there's that second line. But this first one I need to solve for y. So I'm going to rewrite it up here to give ourselves some room. And there's always those 2 steps we've been talking about when you need to get the y by itself. The first is always to move the x's. So to move 6x, we need to subtract it from both sides. That leaves us with negative 3y equals 12 minus 6x. Second step, divide to get the y by itself. So we divide by -3. That leaves you with y equals. Then we take 12 and we divide 12 by -3. That gives us a -4. Then we take our second term, -6x, divided by -3, and that gives us a plus 2x. Right? So again, if we want to graph this one, we want to start at the y-intercept, which is -4 this time. Go up 2 and over 1. Right? You can make a couple points. So we can see from our graph that we still have parallel lines, which is comforting to know. Right? Remember, if you have your calculator and you learned how to graph on your calculator this week, you can use that. Right? So if I bring up our computer calculator, you could have plugged in your equations here. So we had y equals 5 plus, 5 plus 2x. Our second equation, which we still have to solve for y no matter what, so even if you want to use your calculator, you have to get the y by itself. That one ended up being -4, again plus 2x, and then if we graph them, you can double check your lines, and then you can use that to sketch those two lines where they should go on your graph. So again, if you use your calculator appropriately and you make sure to bring one, you'll be able to use it for the quiz. Okay, so that was the second question. Only graphing question. Right. The third question on the review asked you to choose any method you'd like to solve the system and tell how many solutions the system has. So here's the system that we saw. Again, this is like the first one. I think the addition method is the best method to use because our x's and y's are lined up. And hopefully you were already thinking right when you looked at this problem that we need to multiply the first equation by a 3. So if I do that, I'm going to get 6x's plus 12y's equal 24. And then if we rewrite our second equation underneath, what do you notice? Right, you should realize that everything is opposites, right? The 6's go away, our 12y's go away, the 24's go away, and when everything cancels, we're left with a 0 on the left-hand side and a 0 on the right-hand side. 0 equals 0, right? It's always the same number, and we know that when we get the same number on both sides of our equal sign, we have an infinite number of solutions. So really, these two equations are the same. One is just -3 times bigger. So we can cancel everything out and get infinite. Number 4 is going to be the word problem on your quiz. So here's a similar problem to what you will see. So it says you buy 6 shirts at the mall for $75. Solid shirts cost $10, and striped or printed shirts cost $15. How many shirts of each type did you buy? Right, so our word problems, when we use a system of equations, always has 2 items. So let's call X the solid shirts, right, just plain black or plain blue. And then Y is going to be the printed shirts, the ones with a design on it. Okay, so we first know that we bought 6 shirts and they cost $75 in total. So we know that to get to 6 shirts, that's some sort of combination of solid shirts and printed shirts. But we don't know how many of each, but we know that if we combine them, we would get 6. So that's going to be the idea behind your first equation, right? If we take our solid shirts and we combine them or add them with the number of printed shirts we have, that should give us 6 shirts in total. The second equation always has to deal with all of the prices. So we know our solid shirts are $10, so we're going to say 10x. That's going to give us how much money we spent depending on how many solid shirts we bought. Plus, we bought printed shirts. Those cost $15 each, so $15 times y, since it's 15 per shirt. And that equals our total, which is $75. Right, so we want to go ahead and we want to solve this so we can figure out how many shirts of each type we bought. This is already set up for the addition method, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to multiply my first equation. So if you want the x's to cancel out, what do you need to multiply by? Hopefully you're saying a 10 just like I'm saying. So if we multiply the first equation by negative 10, I'm going to get negative 10x plus negative 10y equals negative 60. And I'll rewrite my second equation down below. And then we can go ahead and add. So I'm not going to have any more x's. I'm going to have 5y's equal 15. So if I divide, that means that I bought 3 printed shirts. So I bought 3 printed shirts. Since we know that altogether there has to be 6 of them, if I bought 3 that were printed, I must have bought 3 that were solid, right? If you want, you can substitute y equals 3 into that first equation, and then you get 6 minus 3, which is 3. Okay, and our last one. So the last one isn't anything you need to solve, right? It just asks you to set up a system of equations for which you would use the addition method. So this last question on the quiz is just making sure that you understand when you should use each method of solving. So when normally I say, what method do we use? And you might say the addition method, and I say, how come? And a lot of people will say, correctly, right, we want to use the addition method because the x's and the y's are all lined up. So if that's what you say, then that's what you need to write. So you just need to come up with a system of equations where the x's and the y's are lined up and ready to solve. So in this one, you could have made up any numbers you want, so I'm just going to make some up. So I'm going to say 4x minus y equals 7. Right? Any equation you want. We just know that the second equation needs to have the x's and the y's in the same spot. So this time I'm going to say 3x plus 14y equals 2. Right? You don't have to worry about solving it, so you don't have to worry about what numbers you choose. As long as I would look at it and say, okay, the x's and the y's are lined up, I would solve this using the addition method. That's all we need. Right? So think about that. Think about how you might set up a system of equations if you'd want to use the substitution method, or if you'd want to graph, right? If we're graphing, we know y equals is always good. So those might be the equations that you'd write, 2 equations that are in slope-intercept form to make it really easy to graph. So those are all the answers. Again, our quiz is only going to be 5 questions, so hopefully this has given you a good overview and has helped you to feel prepared for Thursday. See you later, guys.